everyone, and this is Colin Kelly.
And I'm Jackson Lanzing.
And we're here for Comics Online, kicking butt.
I'm back with Jackson and Colin. We're going to be talking about all of the various comics they've been creating, but first we're excited that they're heading out to Chicagoland for Fan Expo Chicago, who we're kind of have to facilitate this interview. Jackson, Colin, question number one, do you have your pizza plan? Where are you going to hit first?
Look, I'm a Lou Malnati stan. I have been since I was a young person. I feel like I'm just going to have to be back there. That said, it has been a age since I was in Chicago. I think the last time I was there might have been with Colin.
It is an amazing return to our origin story.
It is literally where we started.
Our first road trip where our true writing partnership began was a trip out to Chicago to go to Lollapalooza, to see Kanye West, Radiohead, and Rage Against the
Machine. Yeah.
It's
which this is also basically it was this weekend, right? This is Lollapalooza weekend. Yeah. So it's a literal anniversary for us. That's insane.
My goodness. That is bananas.
Happy anniversary.
Thank you.
So much,
15 years.
Wow.
That'll be 15 years of working together because it was 2008.
So while you're at Fan Expo Chicago, you're going to pick out a nice little present for each other, right?
I guess. I guess that's the move.
We always do. But we used to, even before our partnership, we used to have Lou Malnati's pizza dry shipped out to us. Our roommate would always get it, and then we would eat most of it, and then he would be very upset with us. But we're big pizza guys. We love Chicago. We're really thrilled to be coming back, and it's very cool that Fan Expo is willing to hype us and bring us out and bring us back to one of the greatest cities in the country.
Yeah, it's really exciting. I actually grew up in Chicago for a little bit. My dad lived there when I was young, so I would go out for like summers and holidays and things like that. And so I have a lot of very fond memories of Chicago as like a young person, but I really don't know the city very well as an adult. So I'm kind of excited to like re-experience Chicago in a different way for a few days. It's going to be awesome.
This is going to be my second Fan Expo Chicago experience. So I'm excited to not only see you guys in person, they have an amazing lineup of talent coming in. So opportunities for fans to meet and greet, wonderful talent, both in the comic book industry, but voice actors as well as actors across various mediums. So
let it be said now, I am making friends with Todd Stashwick this weekend, come hell or high water. That's like my only goal now. I just want to be friends with Todd Stashwick. That's it. That's all it is. We live next to each other in LA. We have a billion mutual friends. But he's coming to Chicago, so I'm going to meet him there. I'm excited.
We will bring him some pizza. We'll talk about that later.
Sounds good.
But so we've got a lot of great things to talk about. I know we just saw each other at San Diego Comic-Con. Our interviews from San Diego Comic-Con are actually going to be coming live this next week at comicsonline.com. We did a deep dive into Day of Blood Part 1, talked about a little bit about the series in general. We talked about Batman Beyond. We talked about Outsiders. So we've got some really great content. Jackson was joking on Twitter about some of his other interviews. I think ours are better. But more importantly, just excited to celebrate all that you guys are working on. So one of the things that we didn't get to talk about during Comic-Con, and I wanted to make sure you felt at home during this conversation, was your time with Captain America. You can't really see it. There's a note to escape from Dimension Z on the inside.
Nice, good.
But just a reminder.
Remember to do that. Don't not do that. Stay in Dimension Z unless you're Ian Zola. Don't do it.
Priorities. Could you talk about just the process of building out this last big arc? And I know that it was big for many reasons for you guys, of course, leading up to a milestone issue for Captain America, but just what your process was for maybe sketching out this arc, or maybe some personal highlights as those issues have already come out. And obviously we can talk about spoilers, and spoiler warning, this will be a spoiler-filled discussion, but I would just love to hear your process for Captain America as opposed to maybe the other books that you're writing. Was there any difference? Any highlights? Take it away.
It's actually funny because I think the big difference was obviously working hand in hand with Tochi, the other writer of Captain America. And we really got to kind of build a story with all of our great ideas and really kind of work hand in hand in order to tell a story that both uplifted Steve and Sam. And I think that was one of the real challenges, is we needed that conflict between the two men, but ultimately remembering that they are friends and they need to be lifting each other up, even through that conflict, was something that we were wrestling with and trying to balance out while still giving them both their due. Because neither of them can be a villain, even though they can argue with each other incredibly intensely, which is something Jack and I know a little bit about.
Yeah, I mean, I think it was a really interesting the Captain America run in general, right? Sentinel of Liberty was sitting, basically parallel with Symbol of Truth, these two Captain America books that were telling their own individual stories, but we knew from the jump we're going to land together on this event called Cold War. And it was only kind of once we were in the middle of Cold War that it became evident that both books were going to be coming to an end afterwards. So rather than using it sort of as a leapfrog into a second, or like, I guess, a third arc for both books, we really got to just utilize that as our climax. And it meant really bringing in threads from all of our books. So it meant that everything that we'd been building with the Outer Circle had to be paid off there in advance of Captain America 750 and Captain America Finale, which are the sort of natural ends of Sentinel of Liberty. And then Tochi, who had closed off a lot more of his plot lines than we had, because he was kind of, was ready to head into a new arc. He got to go ahead and say, okay, what do I have to say about the relationship between Steve and Sam? What do I have to say about the ways that Sam feels about Captain America now that he's had the mantle for a year parallel to Steve? How can we bring these two together and show how they wield the shield differently, how they interact differently? And then I think we got lucky in that respect, insofar as we had already decided to take Steve back to Dimension Z, and use that as a crucible in which to sort of like boil his worst impulses. Steve Rogers is a character who is he's really made of like most of our best impulses. He's the person you want to be. He's the only character I've ever had like a panic attack about, because I'm like, I'm not a good enough person to write him, right? Like you really do like have like a responsibility to Steve when you're writing him, that's different than a lot of other characters. But when he's in Dimension Z, he makes bad decisions, which is a thing that we've seen. It's a thing Remender set up. I think Rick's a really incredible writer for that. Like he's kind of exactly the right writer to find it, which is like find that place where even Steve isn't at his best. And then returning him to there and having him have to reckon with like, oh, I remember what this brings out in me. I remember the brutality it brings out in me. I remember the ruthlessness it brings out in me. I remember the mission more than I remember the man. Like all that stuff felt like a really great boiler to get down to the root of Steve, which let Sam, fortunately, really shine as like the Captain America who kept his shit together in that beat. And all of a sudden you have that clash of the shields in part 3 of Cold War, 4 of Cold War. Yeah, part 4 of Cold War, where they really just get at each other, and you have this fight between these two men that effectively boils down to Sam being like, hey, let's wait for our friends, and Steve being like, I need to go save my son. And both men are right after a fashion, and it shouldn't have to come to violence. But because the boiler is so high on them in Dimension Z, because so much of Steve's emotions are wrapped up in his relationship with Bucky Barnes and his relationship with Ian Rogers, and that those are the things that are on the line, Steve is making decisions that don't really track with the kind of man that Steve normally is. Steve normally would wait for those people. Steve normally would be more of an open mind. Steve normally would take his time and be more of a tactician. But because these highly emotional things that are all the things that can make Steve make bad decisions are all on the line together, he's making some bad decisions. And it's suddenly where Sam gets to be that guy to like literally have to punch him in the face and punch him into the sky and knock him down into the ground and be like, wake up. And then allowing that for Steve, we got that issue from Tochi and we were like, damn, okay, how are we? Because writing with another co-writer like that is always kind of like writing jazz. Like we're already jazz writers in a lot of ways, but that book was especially like super jazz, because Tochi would just like go do his thing, and then we would get the script and be like, all right, how do we react? And I think one of the fun things about that reaction was then we got to get back to that moment where it's one of my favorite moments of the book, where Steve goes back to Sam. They causes the runs so hard that he causes an avalanche, which is exactly the kind of thing you could do to Steve Rogers. God love him. And then gets that hand from Sam to get out of the way, and then sort of saves Sam, but Sam saves him, and they have that moment. Basically, Steve's like, "I'm sorry. Next time I'll listen to Captain America." And literally, I think Misty goes like, "Wow, really? That's literally all they're going to say?" And Sharon's like, "Yeah, told you. Like these are taciturn men." But I think that's what's really cool is like you have this beat where Steve showcases the man he is, even in his worst, right? Even like in his worst moment, he's able to stop, be like, "Oh, I'm wrong. I'm going to change my behavior, and I'm going to apologize outright. And I'm going to make an apology that means something, not just an apology that's an apology for no reason." And so that was like all of those things stacked up. It was like, okay, we think we've sort of put Steve back on the path of Steve Rogers. Once he gets through that, then they can all go into Omega aligned and deal with the baddies. Because what we didn't want to have is Captain America Omega be this giant issue where everybody's fighting each other rather than everybody fighting the problem. Because especially as it became a big part of all of our finales, it needed to be very like definitive and it needed to finish some stuff. So we really had to like bring everything to a head at the end there. Resulting in some really bombastic, big, crazy, actiony superhero comics. Like Cold War is a wild event, and was a really fun experience, and also like quite a learning experience, I think, for us, just given all of the context of it.
And I mean, you guys are balancing so many titles. Let's stay on the Marvel theme for a moment. For those of us who are still trying to keep up with every single book you're writing, can you give me a?
God bless you.
You guys have done some amazing work, and not to embellish, but I genuinely been and loving all the books. I haven't had a chance to read Guardians of the Galaxy yet. I'm aware of the premise. I understand Groot Fall is the challenge that the Guardians are currently facing, but could you essentially give, I won't say the elevator pitch, but just more of the high level, what do people need to know in order to get caught up to enjoy this current iteration of Guardians?
Yeah, so Guardians of the Galaxy #1 is a pretty fresh book. If you want to just pick up Guardians of the Galaxy #1 by us, Arpakev Walker, just came out like 4 months ago, so it should still be able to find it. That book it's a fresh start. So if you've seen the movies, awesome, you'll have a pretty basic way in, but it's going to be a very different version of that because it is a Western. It is a sort of dark, personal, sad Western. Our Guardians of the Galaxy is a 10-issue arc. It is not designed as like a big, long, ongoing super run. It's really designed as a microcosm where we got to say something very specific about loss and tragedy and the ways in which our the people in our life both get caught up in our tragedy and also are kept at bay because of tragedy. Like the Guardians of the Galaxy have been through a lot of iterations. They've been a team of soldiers. They've been a family. They've been a team of superheroes. They've been space cops. They've been renegades. They've been villains, effectively. They've been all kinds of things. And what we really wanted to do was interrogate them just as a small found family unit that was going through a real period of crisis. Like we wanted to see them at their lowest and see how, even though they are together, they are alone, and how to slowly bring them together in a way that felt like revelatory and changing for them. So the current run, obviously called Groot Fall, is predicated on the idea that at some point before the beginning of our run, and the details of this we've been cagey about because they're going to be explained in our midpoint issue, Guardians of the Galaxy #6, which comes out next month. But effectively, Groot Fall is an event that destroyed the status quo of the Guardians that people knew before, in brutal and swift and very devastating fashion for each of our Guardians. And each of them are finding their own coping mechanisms to deal with this sort of inevitable tragedy, or this sort of sudden, seemingly uninevitable tragedy, this thing that just suddenly happened and that they aren't really sure how to cope with, which is very different than a lot of superhero comics, but was very personal, I think, for us as people who both experienced sudden loss in our lives and wanted to kind of talk about that.
And I think fans of our work, in order to calibrate their brains for it, this is going to be on the Kang spectrum rather than perhaps the Batman Beyond spectrum, right? The Guardians are naturally funny. Like they are just, they're shit talkers. They're going to take the, they're going to have jabs. They're going to have barbs at each other, and they're going to be approaching things in a way that's going to be amusing. But this is not a funny jokes book. I have a pile of tissues right here. I recommend, I've used them all because I'm writing Guardians of the Galaxy, and it's very sad. But we, when we approach the Western genre, I think people hear that and they think, like Star Wars, it's a Western. It's like, well, think of this as Unforgiven, right? Think of this as a Taylor Sheridan story. Like this is a story about grief. It's a story about pushing through. It's a story about looking at the horizon and wondering, how long will this last? And I think that's really the key of enjoying the story, and knowing that even though we are absolutely going to break your heart, we are going to, like, we don't hurt our audiences just for the fun of seeing your tears, right? Our joke is always like, we want your tears, and we do want your tears, right? That's storytelling, right? We want your heart to break, but we are also people. And we know that we can't leave you with a broken heart. That is never going to be our intention. So I in no way will spoil anything about how this is all going to wrap up, but I do want people to know that this hurts, but we are going to soothe that bomb. And we know that breaking your heart isn't our end goal. It's where we start. It is not where we finish.
It's an interesting thing. That's sort of like a wider thing that might be worth talking about in terms of comics in general, actually, just in terms of how we approach, right? Because different writers approach things different ways. And I think our fans are just starting to get to know us, right? We're still pretty early. Like we're writing a lot of books, but ultimately we're still early in our phase at either Marvel or DC. Like everything we've done at DC has been out of continuity. It's been very weird. It's been sort of like cat corner. Outsiders is going to be our only, not canceled at 3 issues in continuity book that's like originally ours, you know what I mean? Like ever, which is very unique in terms of DC. Like normally you start in mainline and then you get to go do all the other weird stuff. And we've been just doing the other weird stuff and then finally found something in mainline that felt weird enough for us to do, right? But I think fans are still figuring out who we are. And so they don't know, like, are these guys monsters? Are they just out here trying to like break all my favorite toys? And I remember often, I have like a sense memory for this one moment that I really don't want to ever do to an audience. I'm going to call him out publicly because there's nothing he's like a superstar and I'm nothing. But Mark Miller, right, has this like reputation for kind of coming into his stories and being like, what if I like hurt you? Like, what if I made this bad? What if I shoved your head in how bad this was? And sometimes that can be super effective. In fact, I really think Wanted in a lot of ways is a highly, highly effective book because it's designed to make you go, do you have sympathy for this monster? And then at the end of the book is like, he's still a monster. Do you have sympathy or no? And that's a really interesting question. I think that's a cool thing to leave the audience with. And I think it can be a really interesting thing for the right reader. But at the same time that he wrote Wanted, he wrote this book called Chosen that I think has been reprinted as like American Jesus. Like it got made as a TV show. Like they've done a bunch of stuff with this thing. But the initial version of it was just this little 3-issue story that was like a really sweet story about a kid learning that he was the second coming of Christ in a very sort of like mundane kind of Amblin-y way. And it was like a really lovely story, actually. I was very into it. And then the last issue ends in just horrifying tragedy for this character, just like absolutely brutal, horrifying, awful tragedy. And then it's over, and that's it. And that's the book. And I'm sure there's more of it eventually, but there certainly wasn't for like a decade. So, and certainly at the moment, there was nothing. It was like the end. And I remember reading that in like a T station in Boston in high school and being like, I will never forgive this. Like, this is so distinctly not the kind of story that I needed out of this story. Like, you led me down a path and then you like surprised me with how much you could hurt me, rather than using this story as a way to explore that hurt and understand it and cope with it and come through it, which to me is something that's sort of the goal of, if you're going to tell that kind of story, it's the goal of that kind of story. And so that's
the point. Yeah.
So, I mean, not to steal Mark Miller's business. He's a very successful guy, and there's a lot of work that he's done that I really love, right?
He's written some incredible stuff.
Yeah. This is not me like chancing off Mark, but that's like a specific moment that I will always remember, and I really try not to replicate for our audience. And so I know that there's Guardians fans especially who maybe were big fans of the runs before and who came into ours and were like, oh, got it. So you killed all my faves and destroyed all their happiness and our status quo is totally ruined. And it's like, yes, but I promise you that's just where we're starting. And then we have a place we're going. And I hope you'll see where it goes. And that's sort of where my head's at with Guardians. So basically, yeah, if you're an old school Guardians head, get ready to hurt for a while. Issue 4 is just Rocket Raccoon being sad for 20 pages, but I swear it's one of the best comics you'll read all year. Like Kev Walker just absolutely murdered it. So like I think that's the complicated pitch for Guardians. The elevator pitch is they all wear cowboy hats now.
Okay, I mean, sold. That's all I really wanted, Jackson. So. So at this point, we're going to hit pause on this interview because we're going to go into some spoilers for Day of Blood, skip ahead. So make sure you come and see these guys at Fan Expo Chicago. Join the rest of us and the amazing talent this coming week. We hope
Saturday,
to see you in Chicagoland.
Saturday, 1 p.m. It's our first ever spotlight panel. First ever spotlight panel for Colin and I. It's very exciting.
Colin, you look super excited.
That's news to me.
We'll be there.
I guess I should. Yeah, I won't be there. I guess. No, I should read my emails better. We have a spotlight panel. Incredible.
We do. I know, right? It's exciting.
Incredible. We're going to be in the comic sketch art, probably in Artist Alley. That's where we'll have a booth. So if fans want to come by, we're going to have all sorts of books to sign and sell. We'll do our song and dance, and you can meet us in person. And we'd love to charm the hell out of you.
We have some great coverage coming up for Fan Expo Chicago. We hope to see you there in person. Guys, we'll continue with Star Trek in a moment. Stay tuned for more coverage with these two guys and Comics Online coming soon.